Newsfirst, face to face with Charlotte Benedict.
Sri Lankans are looking forward to quite a happening year with the elections scheduled just a few months from now. Time will fly by, it already has, and before you know it, it will be time for you to decide on who you want to elect as your next leader, the leader who would hopefully take Sri Lanka out of the current predicament that we're in. A very good evening and welcome. This is Face to Face. Joining us for our current affairs political discussion today is Dr. Harini Amarasuriya from the National People's Power Movement. No stranger to the program. Thank you very much, Dr. Amarasuriya, for taking time off your busy schedule and joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So, Dr. Amarasuriya, let's start off with, where the NPP stands right now. It's a political race. It's a race to win the election, to win the hearts of the people, and to win the trust of the people, because the people's trust in political parties as a whole has been fractured. It's been broken, shredded into pieces by different levels, of course, depending on which political party you're from. The NPP, one of the main accusations against the NPP at the time was that the NPP really doesn't have the international connections that is required for them to garner the support of the international community for Sri Lanka to be helped out of the current predicament that we're in. The current president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, was championed as a person who has so many political connections and would be a much, much better option. But now we see that the leader of the NPP has taken a tour to India. Now, there's not much details about what specifics were discussed at the meeting. Obviously, you weren't a part of the contingent that traveled to India. But based on your knowledge, what really happened? How was the invitation extended? What was discussed there?
Well, the invitation, it was a Indian government invitation extended to the NPP, to the leader of the NPP and a delegation. It was organized via the Indian High Commission here. It was discussed for some time before the dates were set and all of this happened. So yes, there were official meetings with members of the Indian government.
Including the foreign minister, no less.
Including the foreign minister, the external affairs minister,
yes.
I think they're called. And then it's a 3-city visit, and it includes visits with certain research organizations that are of interest to us in terms of our policy directions. So agriculture, technology, those are 2 areas that we are interested in expanding, in investing in. So we are particularly interested in how India has taken advantage of the technology, IT revolution, right? And because we think that's something that we should have also sort of capitalized on, which we failed to do. And we are interested in learning how India did that. We are also interested in the role of research and development in India's sort of future plans and how they sort of have, from where they were at independence almost, well, just 1 year prior to us getting independence, and where we are today as 2 nations, 2 very different places, right? So there's a lot of areas that we want to learn from them and also exchange ideas. So it's a combination. So it's not just the political discussions, but also includes visits with those areas of interest that we are keen to learn more about from other experiences.
But this visit by the leader of the NPP to India, based on upon an invitation extended by the Indian government, no less, has caused quite a stir in the country. There is much discussion about this visit and why this visit was made. There's criticism as to the fact that the JVP at a time were extremely critical of India. They were extremely critical of India, and now that they have had a change in tune and are trying to, just play along.
No, well, I think that the hullabaloo is to be expected. It's entirely predictable, right? And if you think about it, in sort of formal terms, we are a party represented by 3 people in the parliament, right? So
3% of the vote.
3% of the vote. So there's obviously then how come they've got an invitation from a foreign nation, right? But I think that's an indication of the shift that has taken place since the last election, and that the international community is closely following what is happening here. And it's a fact that in the last several years, the popularity of the NPP has expanded significantly, right? And that we are emerging as a very much a player in the next election, right? We have been talked about as potentially forming the next government. We are confident that we stand a very good chance at winning the next election. So the international community is taking note, right? And I think India is one country which follows what happens here closely.
And especially in the region.
Especially in the region. And it's in that context that this invitation was extended. And I don't see any contradiction in accepting that visit and the positions we take vis-a-vis certain interventions in the past by India, because our position is we don't have a feud with any country, right? Our international policy has always been one of non-alignment, and one that is formulated based on areas of common interest. We have never had a feud with a country. We have disagreed with certain positions taken by governments at particular moments, either foreign governments or even our government. And in the 1980s, the Indo-Lanka agreement was something that the JVP opposed at that time, because it was seen as something that was imposed on the people arbitrarily. It was not something that was discussed in Parliament. It didn't get the consent of people.
Much like the current legislation that is being pushed through.
Pushed through, right? I mean, that at least goes through the formality of being presented to Parliament. Indo-Lanka agreement had nothing, not even the formality of being presented to Parliament, right? So for all those reasons, it was opposed. But that was in the 80s, right? I mean, even since then, there have been certain economic interventions by India that we've been critical of. But that doesn't stop us from talking to them. That doesn't stop us from engaging with them. And that certainly will not stop us from working with India in trying to ensure that Sri Lanka gets the best deal out of its regional partnerships.
Now, there were some concerns raised as to if these concerns that the NPP has with interventions made specifically in this case, because the visit was to India, investments by India in Sri Lankan assets, especially key strategic assets that the NPP has been extremely critical of, including the NPP-affiliated trade unions. So do you have any knowledge as to whether these issues were raised, whether at least a little bit was discussed on them?
Well, some of it will, I mean, I don't know to what extent.
You don't have first-hand knowledge.
I don't have first-hand knowledge, but I know that our stance would be clearly communicated. I mean, I'm confident that our stance would be clearly communicated, and our position has been, we are not opposed to Indian investment in this country, but we want it to come in a way that is transparent, is competitive, and is in the benefit of our country as well, and doesn't harm our strategic interests or our policy of non-alignment, right? I mean, obviously, India as our regional partner, we have close ties. I mean, we have historically had very close ties.
And I think even more recently, they were the ones who came forward and gave us $4 billion US dollars.
Right? So, I mean, and India, you can't sort of, ignore India given where we are and our strategic location. So there will always be a close interaction with India. But we have always maintained that whatever our dealings have to be transparent, have to be based on an agenda that is based on national interest rather than a minister wanting a cut from a deal, right? And our concern with some of the investment investments that have been recently talked about is the lack of transparency, right? We believe that any kind of, if we decide to open up an area for foreign investment, then that should be transparent. It should also be competitive, right? Otherwise it's unfair, right? And we won't get the best deal, right? So those concerns we will continue to have and continue to raise with whatever country we deal with. But, that doesn't prevent us from discussing or meeting or having exchange visits or whatever it is. I mean, that's not how foreign diplomatic relations work.
Dr. Harini, the visit of the leader of the NPP to India was not only discussed in Sri Lanka quite widely, but in India as well.
Yes.
In fact, I was going through a report that was published, or at least telecast on an Indian TV channel, where they referred to the NPP as a Marxist-Leninist party leader. But I believe they were referring to the Janatha Vimukti Peramuna. So that little square that the JVP was put into back in the day, now the NPP is also being confined to that square. And to be very honest, there are still members of the general public who have a little bit of a fear when it comes to these, when it comes to the base policy of your party, the NPP, that the main party being the JVP, with communist ideologies and so on and so forth, given that Sri Lanka has been a democratic republic for quite a considerable period of time since independence.
You think?
Or at least we call ourselves
a democratic republic, I'm sure, but I mean, in current circumstances, I think that's highly debatable whether we are actually functioning as a democratic republic. Recent events in Parliament, I think, indicate that it's under severe threat. So I think we have more to fear from the current government than any imagined fear about the JVP or the NPP. And I would disagree with you slightly. I don't think these are concerns of the general public. These are narratives that are deliberately set out about the NPP in order to create and construct a fear about us, right? And many of it is based not just on a deliberate misconstruction of what the JVP stands for or what the NPP stands for, but a conscious or unconscious distortion of what communism and Marxism and Leninism is also about, right? So, I mean, it's a whole, we can probably talk for hours about the way in which, there are baseless kinds of allegations and rumors about what a communist or a left-wing or Marxist-Leninist party is really about, none of which is applicable in this current moment to what the NPP plans to do, right? So I think, so let's take the narrative of fear that is being circulated as a political strategy, which I think has to be dealt with politically, and really what is the NPP about? And I think what the NPP is about, we have always been very clear. We are a progressive a party, right, which believes in social justice, in fair play, in equal opportunity, right? And that is the basis on which all our policy statements have been developed, right? So within that, we believe that there's a role for an efficient and a public-oriented state sector, a role for the private sector, right? A role for different models of cooperation between the public and the private sector, right? There are certain areas where the private sector functions with very little state intervention. There are certain areas where the state would need to collaborate with the private sector. There are certain areas where the state would have more of a stake in issues which relate to national security or other strategic interests, right? And there are also other models where there are what we call private-public partnerships,
Okay.
private-public people partnerships,
Okay.
like well, like the cooperative models, right? So there are all kinds of ways in which these different sectors could interact and collaborate, and we have always been very open about the fact that we would explore all of those different options based on which sector we are talking about and how we want to manage that sector and what that sector means within the larger national development or economic plan.
Dr. Harini, now Sri Lankan voters have a little bit of, or quite a lot of trauma.
Yes.
Because close to an election, you hear these beautiful plans. I think just taking the past 2 elections, go back to 2015 when the movement for social justice led by Venerable Omar Pesobithatera, I believe, brought forward Maithripala Sirisena as a candidate.
Madhulu
Avisobithatera,
yes.
I beg your pardon. Madhulu Avisobithatera brought forward
the National Movement for Social Justice.
Yes, the National Movement for Social Justice, and then they spearheaded the campaign of former President Maithripala Sirisena, and there was quite a lot of sense spoken of anti-corruption. There were some good ideas, good policies brought forward. However, what usually happens in Sri Lanka, and I believe you've had more experience in this front than I have, given the number of years that you've, of course, been in politics and been really aware of what's happening here. Saner minds do not prevail post-election. So why is the NPP any different?
NPP is different, I think, primarily because we are building a movement, right? We are not just simply interested in being the next political party in power or bringing about an individual about a campaign about bringing an individual into power, right? Which is why for the last a couple of years, specifically, we've been working very hard at mobilizing people, mobilizing citizens towards this change, towards this transformation, right? So, I think that's significant. You talked about democracy. I think one of the biggest problems that we have faced in the last 4 decades, almost 5, the crisis of democracy that we have faced is that the role of the citizen has increasingly been limited to simply casting a vote, right? That's the only point where the citizen feels empowered, when you're casting a vote. We think democracy needs to deepen where citizens are much more engaged in that process. Citizens feel much more empowered to be part of the decision-making process. So as a movement, we are really looking at ways in which that decision-making power can be decentralized and given to citizens, right? So we've been working really hard on those aspects of deepening and strengthening democracy, of deepening and strengthening citizen participation, right? That we think is what will make this difference really different, right? Because it's not just about kicking some people out and bringing a new set of people. It is about a real transformation in the consensus that you have between the ruler and the citizens and the rulers, citizen and the government, a different engagement, a different way of collaborating. And we have been really working with people in getting them on board to look at this in this particular way, looking at this as not just about casting a vote and electing a new government, but about examining your role as a citizen in this process and what your role and responsibilities are also, how you can engage more directly in the decisions that are made and how they affect you, right? That's the difference. And we are convinced, we are very confident, let's say, that this message is resonating with people, and that is why NPP is being trusted by people, because we are not just talking about, dealing with this crisis. You have to deal with the crisis, but we want to do something more. We want to transform the way we govern ourselves and transform the way in which citizens also participate in governing, right? So I think that's what's going to make this different.
So, Dr. Harini, you were speaking about transparency, interacting more with people, and of course letting the people know what is exactly happening instead of just keeping them in the dark. Transparency International a few years ago launched this campaign requesting parliamentarians to declare their assets and declarations. There were a few who did, and there's a very close friend of mine whose only precondition at an election when he goes to vote, one of his basic preconditions, if you don't satisfy this, he's not going to vote for you, is that whoever he votes for has to have their assets and declarations made public, because at the end of the day, ordinary people like myself and of course the general public have to declare their assets now, because they're liable to pay income taxes, and improper disclosure of their assets and liabilities could lead to penalties in the future, and that's clearly depicted in the Inland Revenue Act, and it seems like the Inland Revenue Department is, going to start getting more and more aggressive given the economic situation in the country. So, is the NPP willing to take a stand and say all of our parliamentarians or all of our candidates will be declaring their assets for the reason of transparency?
It's a condition that you have to declare assets, right? I mean,
not make it public.
We have no objection to it going public, right? If we have always maintained, and in fact we supported the idea that the Parliament should make this available. We have no objection whatsoever, because anyway annually, or even as contestants, we have to submit our assets, the declaration, to both the Election Commission and once you're elected to Parliament, we do that annually. Certainly the Election Commission can make those public, so can the Parliament. I mean, the Parliament is all about open Parliament these days, right? So make it public, put it up online, we have no objection.
So there is space, of course, for parliamentarians themselves to personally make it public.
Yeah, but I think that it has to happen in some systematic manner. It can't be just me randomly putting it up on some website somewhere, right? There has to be a procedure, there has to be a process through which it is made public, and where everybody does that, right? As part of the process, not just because I want to be like a good person and I do it. That's not how you make change, right?
But there are allegations, the veracity of which I would leave the general public to decide upon, that there is no transparency as far as the NPP goes. Nobody knows how they get the money to host the meetings that they host. They always claim that it was this comrade and that comrade that gave money. So wouldn't it be more transparent if it's a condition, as far as at least the party is concerned, that if you want to get candidacy from the NPP, you need to come clean, you need to make your assets and liabilities public?
As a contestant, you have to make your asset declaration.
To the people.
But the question is how you do that, no?
Okay.
So, I mean, what? You want the NPP to put up their asset declarations on a website? I don't think that's how it should be, right?
But wouldn't that be a show of good faith?
I also know where this question is coming from. I have answered this question multiple times on your channel, right? And I have explained this multiple times, that just the declaration of assets is not going to reduce corruption, right? There has to be a process through which your assets are declared, and your assets are actually then also where there's some kind of a way of investigating whether what you're declaring and your lifestyle actually there's a
gap.
Right, and there has to be a way.
Like if I say I only get 50,000 a month and I drive a V8,
then
it's highly unlikely.
It's highly unlikely. Then there needs to be a way in which that's investigated. So just declaring your asset, having an asset declaration in and of itself is only half of the problem, right? So you have to see this as a whole, right? And in that sense, we, as an NPP government, we would want to make sure that happens, right? That whole process is open and transparent, and that you're held accountable. You talked about fundraising. We have. I think we are the only, which is why we have always been accused of being a party with huge funds, because we are the only party that actually declares our assets to the Election Commission, where we annually submit audited accounts properly.
So you all have more funds than the major political parties in the country.
Because we've declared our funds, right? And any fundraising that happens for any of our meetings, it happens in a way where there's a way, there's what you call Adhara Patra, that that where names and amounts are recorded,
so
and that has to be that has to be submitted to the party, right? How about how the funds received and how it was spent is something that every district has a record of, right? So, I mean, I think we are probably much more open or much more careful about this than any other party, simply because we've talked about this issue so much, right? We cannot afford to be otherwise, right? We cannot confidently
be branded as a hypocrite.
Yeah, because we cannot confidently point fingers at others if we are doing something dodgy ourselves, right? So that's why we have to be ultra careful, right? So, yeah, I mean, I don't see an issue with that.
So thank you very much, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, for being so candid in the expression of your views. Of course, the people are looking for more transparency, better leadership, and ultimately a team, of course, this time around, who would take us out of this political crisis. Whether the general public would decide that team to be the NPP, the SJP, the SLPP, the UNP, or any other political party is something that we will get to know soon, as the elections are coming soon. Of course, it's incumbent on the general public to make an informed decision, not just a decision, but an informed decision. And for you to make an informed decision, the media, mass media, social media, and various other platforms will provide you the information that you need. And of course, as a responsible media organization, we will provide you accurate information, and we will continue to do so for the betterment of the nation and the betterment of your lives as well. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, for joining us on Face
Always good to be here.
Face. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our viewers out there for tuning in to another episode. Until we meet again, take care and God bless.